Okay. One October day in 1917, said Jordan Baker that afternoon, sitting up very straight on a straight chair in the tea garden at the Plaza Hotel. Okay, so now we have shifted to tea in the afternoon. Nick just had lunch and met Tom and Gadsby, and then Gadsby disappears. Now, later in the day, Nick is having tea with Jordan Baker. Jordan Baker is telling us the story in 1917. So that's like 5 years ago. I was walking along from one place to another, half on the sidewalks and half on the lawns. I was happier on the lawns because I had on new shoes from England with rubber knobs on the soles that bit into the soft ground. I had on a new plaid skirt also that blew a little in the wind, and whenever this happened, the red, white, and blue banners in front of all the houses stretched out stiff and said tut 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 in a disapproving way. The largest of the banners and the largest of the lawns belonged to Daisy Fay's house. She was just 18, 2 years older than me, and by far the most popular of all the young girls in Louisville. Okay, so Jordan is telling a story of when she was a kid, and apparently she was a kid in the same town as Daisy. She dressed in white and had a little white roadster, and all day long the telephone rang in her house, and excited young officers from Camp Taylor demanded the privilege of monopolizing her that night, always for an hour. When I came opposite her house that morning, her white roadster was beside the curb, and she was sitting in it with a lieutenant that I had never seen before. They were so engrossed in each other that she didn't see me until I was 5 feet away. "Hello, Jordan," she called me unexpectedly. "Please come here." I was flattered that she wanted to speak to me, because of all the older girls I admired her the most. She asked me if I was going to go to the Red Cross and make bandages. I was. Well, then, would I tell them that she couldn't come in that day? The officer looked at Daisy while she was speaking in a way that every young girl wants to be looked at sometime, and because it seemed romantic to me, I've remembered the incident ever since. His name was Jay Gatsby, and I didn't lay eyes on him again for over 4 years. And even after I met him on Long Island, I didn't realize it was the same man. So wait a minute. When Daisy was an 18-year-old girl, she met Jay Gadsby? Dun dun dun, the plot thickens. That was 1917. By the next year, I had a few beaux of my own, and I began to play in tournaments, so I didn't see Daisy very often. She went with a slightly older crowd, when she went with anyone at all. Wild rumors were circulating about how her mother had found her packing her bag one winter night to go to New York to say goodbye to a soldier who was going overseas. Hmm, what soldier do you think was going overseas that she wanted to say goodbye to? She was effectively prevented, but she wasn't on speaking terms with her family for several weeks. After that, she didn't play around with soldiers anymore, but only with a few flat-footed, short-sighted young men in town who couldn't get into the army at all. And by the next autumn, she was gay again, gay as ever. She had a debut after the armistice, and in February she was presumably engaged to a man from New Orleans. In June, she married Tom Buchanan of Chicago with more pomp and circumstance than Louisville had ever known before. He came down with 100 people in 4 private cars and hired a whole floor of the Mulback Hotel. And the day before the wedding, he gave her a string of pearls valued at $350,000. Whoa. So Daisy met Tom, and he was super wealthy, more wealthy than anyone had seen in Louisville. In fact, he gave her a necklace worth $350,000 back in 1920-ish. So that's a ton of money for a necklace. I was a bridesmaid. I came into her room half an hour before the bridal dinner, and I found her lying on the bed, as lovely as the June night in her flowered dress, and as drunk as a monkey. She had a bottle of Sauterne in one hand and a letter in the other. "Congratulate me," she muttered. "I've never had a drink before, but oh, how I do enjoy it." "What's the matter, Daisy?" I was scared, I can tell you. I'd never seen a girl like that before. "Here, dears." She groped around in a wastebasket she had with her on the bed and pulled out the string of pearls. "Take 'em back downstairs and give 'em back to whoever they belong to. Tell 'em all Daisy's changed your mind. Say, Daisy's changed your mind." Daisy's getting drunk. She's trying to send the necklace back to Tom, telling Tom that Daisy's changed her mind. And she began to cry. She cried and cried. I rushed out and I found her mother's maid, and we locked the door and got her into a cold bath. She wouldn't let go of the letter. She took it in the tub with her and squeezed it up into a wet ball, and only let me leave it in the soap dish when she saw that it was coming to pieces like snow. Who could she have gotten a letter from the night before her wedding that would upset her enough to make her want to cancel the wedding? Myrtle? We don't know Myrtle yet. This is back when she was a kid. She met some soldier who went off to war. Soldier's name was Jay Gadsby. Gadsby could have sent her a letter from Paris or something saying, "I'm on my way home." But she's about to get married. So she gets drunk and cries and won't let go of the letter. But she didn't say another word. We gave her spirits of ammonia and put ice on her forehead and hooked her back into her dress. And a half hour later, when we walked out of the room, the pearls were around her neck and the incident was over. The next day, at 5 o'clock, she married Tom Buchanan without so much as a shiver and started off on a 3 month trip to South Seas. So she was crying about this letter she got, but the next day she gets married anyway. I saw them in Santa Barbara when they came back, and I thought I'd never seen a girl so mad about her husband. If he left the room for a minute, she'd look around uneasily and say, "Where's Tom gone?" and wear the most abstracted expression until she saw him coming in the door. She used to sit on the sand with his head in her lap by the hour, rubbing her fingers over his eyes and looking at him with unfathomable delight. It was touching to see them together. It made you laugh in a hushed, fascinated way. That was in August. A week after I left Santa Barbara, Tom ran into a wagon on the Ventura Road one night and ripped a front wheel off his car. The girl who was with him got into the papers too because her arm was broken. She was one of the chambermaids in the Santa Barbara hotel. What was Tom doing when he was married to Daisy, apparently? In the Santa Barbara hotel with the maid? What's he doing with her in his car? He's doing it again. He's a cheater. Jordan is still telling the story. The next April, Daisy had her little girl and they went to France for a year. I saw them one spring in Cannes and later in Deauville, and they came back to Chicago to settle down. Daisy was popular in Chicago, as you know. They moved with a fast crowd, all of them young and rich and wild, but she came out with an absolutely perfect reputation, perhaps because she doesn't drink. It's a great advantage not to drink among hard drinking people. You can hold your tongue, and moreover, you can time any little irregularity of your own so that everybody else is so blind that they don't see or care. Perhaps Daisy never went in for a more at all, and yet there's something in that voice of hers. Well, about 6 weeks ago, she heard the name Gadsby for the first time in years. It was when I asked you, you remember? If you knew Gadsby in West Egg? And after you had gone home, she came into my room and woke me up and said, "What Gadsby?" And when I described him, I was half asleep. She said, in the strangest voice, that it must have been the man that she used to know. It wasn't until then that I connected this Gadsby with the officer in a white car. Okay, so that's the story that Jordan tells us. Now we figure out how Daisy and Gadsby know each other. When Jordan Baker had finished telling all this, we had left the plaza for half an hour and were driving in a Victoria through the Central Park. I don't know what that is, a car or a carriage? The sun had gone down behind the tall apartments of the movie stars in the West 50s, and the clear voices of girls already gathered like crickets on the grass rose through the hot twilight. "I'm the Sheik of Araby. Your love belongs to me. At night when you're asleep, into your tent I'll creep." Oh, that's kind of creepy. Um, it was a strange coincidence, I said. But it wasn't a coincidence at all. Why not? Gatsby bought that house so that Daisy would be just across the bay. Oh, so Gatsby comes back 5 years later, buys a house so that he's near Daisy and he can creep on her. Then it had not been merely the stars to which he had aspired on that June night. He came alive to me, delivered suddenly from the womb of his purposeless splendor. He wants to know, continued Jordan, if you'll invite Daisy to your house some afternoon and then let him come over. The modesty of the demand shook me. He had waited 5 years and bought a mansion where he dispensed starlight to casual moths so that he could come over some afternoon to a stranger's garden. Did I have to know all this before he could ask such a little thing? He's afraid. He's waited so long. He thought you might be offended, you see. He's a regular tough guy underneath it all. Something worried me. Why didn't he ask you to arrange a meeting? He wants her to see his house, she explained. And your house is right next door. Oh, I think he half expected her to wander into one of his parties some night, went on Jordan. But she never did. Then he began asking people casually if they knew her, and I was the first one he found. It was that night he sent for me at his dance, and you should have heard the elaborate way he worked up to it. Of course, I immediately suggested a luncheon in New York, and I thought he'd go mad. I don't want to do anything out of the way, he kept saying. I want to see her right next door. Do you guys know why Gadsby would want to see Daisy right next door to his house? That's one possibility. So he sees Daisy, and can't he then point out the window and say, you see that monstrous house right there? That's mine. Do you think Daisy's interested in money? She almost gave back the $250,000 necklace, right? But then she took it back. When I said you were a particular friend of Tom's, he started to abandon the whole idea. He doesn't know very much about Tom, though he says he's read a Chicago paper for years just on the chance of catching a glimpse of Daisy's name. Oh, wait a minute. Didn't Tom and Gadsby just get introduced at lunch? So now Gadsby already knew who Tom was? Maybe that's why he was embarrassed? Because he's creeping on the Tom's wife? It was dark now, and as we dipped under a little bridge, I put my arm around Jordan's golden shoulder and drew her towards me and asked her to dinner. Suddenly, I wasn't thinking of Daisy and Gadsby anymore, but of this clean, hard, limited person who dealt in universal skepticism and who leaned back jauntily just within the circle of my arm. A phrase began to beat in my ears with a sort of heady excitement. There are only the pursued, the pursuing, the busy, and the tired. And Daisy ought to have something in her life, murmured Jordan to me. Does she want to see Gadsby? She's not to know about it. Gadsby doesn't want her to know. You're just supposed to invite her to tea. We passed a barrier of dark trees, and then the facade of 59th Street. A block of delicate, pale light beamed down into the park. Unlike Gadsby and Tom Buchanan, I had no girl whose disembodied face floated along the dark cornices and blinding signs, and so I drew up the girl beside me, tightening my arms. Her wan, scornful mouth smiled, and so I drew her up again, closer, this time to my face. Wait a minute. Doesn't Nick have a girlfriend back in the West? And now he's turning Jordan into a girlfriend? And what about those missing 4 hours with Mr. McGee? Maybe not.